Welcome back to Data Center Battlegrounds. My name is Nate and I'll be your host for this morning. And today we're going to be doing a quick coffee chat and talking about major developments in the energy policy world. I like to do these types of videos because it's a little bit different from, news media react on Mondays and then YouTube reacts on Wednesday and Fridays, but I'll make this short. So, the energy policy world is on fire this week just because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which, in case you don't know, is a independent agency of the US government that regulates the interstate transmission and wholesale sale, of electricity and natural gas and the prices of interstate transport of petroleum by pipeline. So it's part of DOE, Department of Energy, but it's separate and it's independent. That's all you need to know. So this week, what happened was a lot of folks have been looking to FERC, especially since right now, pause for dramatic, entrance with coffee. A lot of folks have been looking to FERC to kind of give guidance on like this like Wild West era that we're in right now when it comes to like the energy grid. So we have utilities, we have data centers, we have folks whose energy bills are going through the roof, all these different things. So FERC was saying for a while that they were going to put out some guidance on like how to, handle stuff mainly at the grid operator like level though. So we have the ratepayer protection pledge, which, back in March, all these like tech companies signed to avoid was voluntary and it's a pledge. So go figure. But the idea is that you don't pass the costs of transmission upgrades, infrastructure upgrades to the consumer because it's all about data centers. And then most recently, there was a bipartisan bill called the Ratepayer Protection Act, introduced by Representative Kathy Castor and Gabe Evans to protect American families from the cost of energy and grid upgrades required for new data centers, but also making sure that at the same time that they were able to, obviously bring data centers onto the grid. Sorry, not enough coffee this morning. So without spending like 15 minutes on this damn thing, basically like the idea with the grid is that you want a resilient, reliable, and forward-thinking grid. That's the idea, right? You want to make sure that you don't have rolling blackouts and brownouts during the summer because like everyone has their AC unit online or their heat pump going crazy, and then the data center down the road is hogging all the power, okay? And so that's the main concern. And then you also want to design a grid that's like climate resilient, if you believe in that, because heat waves are getting worse, they're staying for longer, and then in the worst case scenario, we might become like India, for example, which is dealing with 50 degrees Celsius like heat waves for like months at a time. That's like 110 for you uncultured Americans. I laugh because I'm half French, half American. Fun fact. And they have like the wet bulb effect, which is even worse because they can't even sweat past like 45 degrees. Like your body just shuts down. And so like a regular 25-year-old um, you know, average male or whatever, if they're out there for like 4 hours or whatever, they might actually pass from heat stroke, which is crazy. So, anyway, in the US, fun fact, there are 6 major grid operators. PJM Interconnection, that represents like the East Coast, woo, or DC, we're in. Southwest Power Pool, ISO New England, MISO, CA ISO, and then NY ISO. So, six, it's like Lord of the Rings. 6 grid operators, one of them to rule them all. 5 reform areas, and then basically I'm not gonna bore you with like the policy because like it would have to be like a 30-minute video to explain what the Federal Power Act is. But the idea is that FERC is essentially telling the grid operators that you need to justify the tariff provisions that govern how data centers, manufacturing facilities, and other large energy users connect to the grid. That's the main idea. And so this speed to power topic is like what this is all about. Like how fast can you bring everything online? Data centers, car manufacturing, semiconductors, all these different things. And so what's happening is that, and it matters because your power bill, going up because of the data center down the road. We've talked about this on the channel before. And I've told you like what I think, right? There's like 2 schools of thought. There's like the folks that say that their power bills are going up because of data centers, and then there's the opposite side where, industry and government in some cases are saying like, data centers actually stabilize and even lower the grid. I think like one case study I've seen in Indiana recently the other day about that. So it depends, right? Every geographic area is different. every area requires transmission upgrades and grid stabilization, all these different things. And so, like, I think at the end of the day, what we're seeing is different states will have different net effects, right? Some may have power bills that go up because of data centers. Others might be a combination, I think, of like transmission upgrades and data centers coming online, and just like they haven't had to upgrade their damn grid in like 30 years. So it's like the cost of those upgrades are being passed on to the consumer in some way. I think like at the end of the day, like your energy provider, Pepco or Pepco is here in DC. They look at like, you know, okay, what was the total cost of like running kilowatt per hour stuff? You know what I mean with like the metric. And then they're just like, okay, we got to charge the consumer X number, for this month because of just like everything that's happening. So protecting ratepayers, powering innovation, and then strengthening reliability. So we've talked about all three of those. I'm not going to, go into great detail about that. That's why it matters. And then the category of reforms include, and remember, this is directly to the grid operator, not the American consumer, because like at the end of the day, we're the end, we're the downstream like net consumer of all the, we rely on electricity. So efficient study processes, cost transparency, co-location rules. So like, if you put a data center next to like a power plant, what do you do? Flexible load service. So the grid, isn't designed to run on like full power, I think like for the entire year. So we have to design data centers with this like grid flexible approach where it's like, okay, if everyone has their like, I don't know, AI workloads like running, then you would make room obviously for the consumer demand more so than the private demand at certain points in the day. So like AC units running full blast during the day, and then you run your AI workloads like at night. Or in some cases, you even shut off the data center entirely from the grid if power demand is just too much. And so, and generation studies, generating facilities serving electrically proximate and co-located large. Yeah, I mean, basically, like, how do we develop a process or a workflow to study how we can balance like everything at the end of the day? So, key deadlines. This is the most interesting part for me. So within 30 days, all the 6 grid operators have to submit an informational report on generation adequacy for existing and large new loads. This is a feasibility study at the end of the day, and then in 60 days, they have to justify their current tariffs or file tariff changes addressing the issues identified. So we'll see what happens at the end of the day, but the idea is that, FERC has stepped in and finally like said that y'all have to do something about this, like the 6 grid operators, because like I think there was so much damn confusion about like what each grid operator in which part of the US was going to do with all these data centers coming online. And then FERC is like at the top of the food chain directing like all the different like grid operators like y'all have to figure this out. Otherwise, like we have like massive like regional differences, the FERC like fact sheet literally like makes a note that like transmission service models differ, roles and responsibilities for transmission planning are split differently. Um, Orders account for regional differences and leaves room for RTU and ISO to define large loads. So basically, like what you have is 6 different grid operators with 6 different transmission models, and then like within those transmission models, you have different processes for studying like large load service requests from data centers. So it's like kind of like a massive, patchwork effect, if you want to call it that, of like who figures out what. And so like there will be more updates in the future according to the fact sheet. And yeah, I'm happy that this finally happened because like I was like confused. I was like kind of keep an eye on the news like all the time to try to see like what FERC was going to do. And putting a 60-day clock on like the large load problem with AI data centers is like there's finally some like it's like when you do your homework, right? It's like you're not going to do your homework if you have like 2 weeks of like spare time, right? Typically the majority of us I think like does our homework like the day before, you know what I mean? Because like we have the pressure of the deadline. So FERC stepping in with a deadline with this 30-day, 60-day, uh, deadline with what we were talking about is great because it forces the grid operators to finally come up with like a comprehensive like conclusion. Like, okay, we need to improve this here. We can, connect the data centers here and there. And so like I think the next question will be The next question, I mean, I think the next question, honestly, for energy policy will be like, it's not like, can we build data centers? It's, can we turn, for example, grid flexibility, battery storage, generation, and flexible load with data centers into usable power like fast enough to bring it like onto the, grid. And then at the same time, making sure that the American consumer does not pay, any like cent increase. I don't know. I think like, will Americans pay for some, degree of change? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe like a minor increase in like their energy bill if everything goes well. But worst case scenario, the data centers pass the externality cost onto the American consumer, and then you have a $300 like energy bill that goes up if that's not happening like already. So anyway, that's it for today's coffee chat. Wanted to keep this like brutally short. I will link the 30-day, 60-day fact sheet notice from FERC, and then also the what was it, the Bipartisan Ratepayer Protection Act as well. I'm gonna do some LinkedIn posts on both of these for next week, just because it's like super interesting, and all my energy policy friends are going off the rails with this. Like, this is the type of stuff that like makes them like justify their existence in life. It's like FERC came out with like a ruling, great. Like, I'm so happy for energy policy. But anyway, I'll link those two in the comment section down below. That's all I got for you for today's coffee chat on Data Center Battlegrounds. Like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you also subscribe to the Climate Code newsletter, because that comes out on Mondays at 7 a.m. And that's all I have for you today. So, ta-ta.